Okay, well, PTA Global community, once again, this is Rodney Corn with PTA Global, and we're at the Up Close and Personal, and today is another special day, as they've all been so far, but today is a special day because I get to be joined by a great friend and also a co-founder of PTA Global, and he's also the inventor and owner of Viper, which is really cool. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But he really needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him to you anyway, Michol Dalcourt. And Michol, it's a pleasure, and thank you so much for being here. I know that the last week has been very interesting for you, and for those of you that don't know, Michol just had a little baby girl.
Berkeley, and
she is beautiful. So congratulations on that, and thanks for taking time out of your schedule and your travels and everything, and your family time, most importantly, to be with us, Michol.
Well, no, it's a pleasure to be here, Roddy.
Moosh, you know we've been talking about triangulation in this series, and we've started with Gary, went to Dr. Thompson up at USF, who you're very familiar with, and Roy Sugarman, who you know real well as well. And the whole concept of triangulation, that kind of came from the Gray Institute. We've looked at different components, kind of where it came from, how it applies to older population, how it works on the brain. And I'd like to look at you now with your expertise relative to triangulation. And can you just expand upon how triangulation is so vitally important, or how it impacts the fascial system, the myofascia, and why that's so important for us as trainers?
Sure. I think what we might do is start with this idea of, if we look at triangulation, all it is a measure of the 3D forces that enter into our body. And right. What the Gray Institute has done very well is to put a language to that three-dimensionality. And if we look at the physics of it, we would say that we've got all this force around us that enters, and you and I have talked about this at length. Our body's an energy conduit system. So first and foremost, we want our body to receive energy. And this energy comes to us in all different vectors, so all different variations of angulations. So, top to bottom, side on, and then all those different angles within that Gary explained in one of your earlier video conferences. And when we look at that, we would say, okay, well, how does our body adapt to all those forces? Because if our body's imposed to those demands, it must adapt somehow. And so what happens is we take a look at the fascial structures, the connective tissue, and we look at the muscle structures and we say, well, what happens if we have more than one force, more than one direction of force applied to the body? What happens? And, for all the geeks out there, you can look at something called Davis's Law. Your hand comes up. And what it is, we look at bone and Wolff's Law, we look at connective tissue and Davy's Law, and we say, well, structure is being laid down on lines of stress. And if we can impose more stressors to the body, more variety of stressors to the body actually gets stronger because it starts to lay down more of its substance in more in different angles and different vectors, so to speak. So, if you and I were to do a cadaver studies class and we would remove the skin, especially if that was in vivo, so if someone was doing surgery, what you would do is you would take off the layers of skin, and what you would see is a morass, just a whole organization that almost looks like fractal chaos. Mm-hmm. So think of a spider's web, and it's a chaotic spider's web. It's just going into every different angle. And the reason why we have fractal chaos is so that we can stabilize ourselves in all different angulations, and we can have shape stability. Now, what shape stability is it doesn't matter where Rodney Corn goes, whether it's space, underwater, or on ground, you have shape stability. You're going to look like rock. That fractal chaos is actually by design. And if you look at any biological structure, they kind of have that similarness, that this idea that we've got this spider web of connective stuff that keeps all our body together. So the importance of understanding triangulation is, if I can now speak the language of triangulation, I can now train triangulation. I can actually bring about what we would call vector variability. And what vector variability is taking into account motions that are in different angles, with different heights, with different depths, with different forces entering into our body. And the sum total of that is our connective tissue gets stronger, which creates better strength and better pre-stress. And once we have better pre-stress, we have better stability across joints. We might have more stable motion as we move around. And our structure has an integrity to it that is consistent with human function.
Can you explain the term fractal real quick and kind of the definition or the information behind fractal chaos and why that's so important?
And the nice thing about fractals is it really explains how natural shapes exist when they're subjected to forces. So most of what we see in nature has, oddly enough, a fractal arrangement. And it's just as easy as going to your kitchen, grabbing a knife and grabbing an orange or a lemon, cutting it open, and taking a look inside. You'll see a compartment within a compartment within a compartment within a compartment, and you start to scratch your head and go, I wonder why it's set up that way. You look at if you ever see a bees, for beekeepers when they have the honeysuckle and the bees, all that is a network of fractals that are all coordinated so that that geometric shape expands out. And so nature takes this very efficient form because it mitigates stress, which means it spreads it out, and it organizes itself based on the forces around it. So nature, because of the forces, organizes itself in that pattern. And so when we think about introducing forces that are consistent with life in our exercise and training, then all of a sudden our body can reinforce that natural pattern of structure. And once we do that, then we're more authentic in our structure, in our organization, and we don't have that nagging knee pain, for instance. We may not have that nagging back pain. And so it all starts with the realization that dimensionalities and triangulation is all it is a language to speak about how we can introduce the appropriate forces into our body so that our body can appropriately adapt.
Yeah, and that's a really big concept that I know excites a lot of us, and that's kind of being brought to light right now. And triangulation, the reason we've started in this whole up close and personal series with triangulation is because it has so much depth and height and angulation to it. And when you start talking about fascia, and you start talking about kind of the fractal network or the self-replicating system that goes from smaller that creates a bigger organism, so to speak, and how that's all interconnected through the fascial network and the dispersion of forces through that, that becomes really, really powerful as we get into training. And I take a turn and I go to your tool, the Viper. And when we look at Viper, isn't that kind of where you got the idea, or what was kind of spawning this new idea for motion when you started realizing how this is all interlinked and interconnected and what the body is really kind of built like?
For everybody that has either seen or used Viper, I wish I could say that I really was that systematic in my thought process to invent the tool. But what it came from was a realization of what was successful in the realm of training and conditioning or life and sport. And so what we did early on in developing the tool is we took a look at, who was being successful in their motion. What group of individuals really had some authentic strength that could transfer. And, that was the genesis of the tool, was taking a look at, who was strong and how they were strong and what made them strong, and taking a look at those individuals, namely farm kids. We asked ourselves, well, why are they so strong relative to city kids, even as it relates to sport? So, Rod, you played football in college, and, I could bet dollars to donuts that if you played a team that it was a rural team made up of largely farm kids, they were tough as nails. And what made them tough as nails wasn't that they went into the gym and did, a certain exercise over and over again, not that there's something wrong with that. But what they did is imposed different demands on their body. They imposed different forces on their body. And the net effect of that was that the body was able to adapt such that it had a greater ability to stabilize and transfer. And once there's greater stability in the body, our bodies can generate more force. And so they kind of work this fractal network in a way by lifting bales of hay. And every time you lifted a bale of hay, it wasn't the same way. And every time you moved farm animals around, the paddock, it wasn't the same way. And every time you pounded a post into the ground, it wasn't the same way. And if you lifted rocks and moved farm equipment around. It was never the same way. And as they introduced that subtleness of vector variations, that triangulation difference, their body was able to get very strong no matter what position you put it in.
Yeah.
And, if that's the case, we needed a tool that could be that authentic. And so that was the genesis of Viper. And then when we used it, we started to see how effective that was. And only then did we discover the science behind it that backed it up, which we were lucky. We were lucky that we started to learn things that validated the tool to be used. And that made us even more excited.
Michol, thanks so much for your time. If people want to get in contact with you, or they want to learn more about Viper, or they just want to see some things that you're doing, where can we go to get some more information about you besides PTA Global? We know you're a co-founder of PTA Global, so you always can contact us here, but in the things that you're doing as well with Viper and everything else.
Yeah, so the Viper website that's coming online soon is viperfit.com, so VIPRfit.com. And what we'll have on that website is links to education, links to exercises, links to the education behind the tool, and then some of the programming that we've put together. You can also check out the Viper Fit Facebook page, which will be an ongoing population of different exercises and different challenges, etc. And if there are those individuals that want to know a little bit more of the science behind fascia, the science behind the muscle, what happens as we think about the myofibroblasts, which are just elements within fascia that actually adapt to mechanical load, not neurological load. So it's about putting load in the body in different ways. If that really appeals to an individual and they want to dig deeper in that, there's a lot of good resources. And our website is www.instituteofmotion.com. So it's just instituteofmotion.com. And on that website is going to be the forum to which we explore the depths of information, the science that is coming out, and then we ask ourselves the question, well, what does that mean, and how do we apply exercise solutions to it?
Sounds great. So there you have it. You have a couple of websites, a Facebook page. Feel free to jump on there, chit-chat, connect with Michol, and connect with the things that he's doing, and we appreciate your time. Michol, thanks so much, buddy.
Thanks, Roddy. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
You got it.